we've now got to a point where we play fast and loose with national security. We play fast and loose with national interest. We've seen it with, some of my colleagues who have lost their jobs over this situation. With former defense secretaries, Priti Patel actually, who lost her job because of what she was doing in Israel with unauthorized meetings. So I just think we've got to start to have a national conversation about what is in Britain's national interest, how we deal with the issues of national security, and how we take the offices that we hold seriously.
Now let's turn our attention to Britain trying to help British citizens leaving the Middle East. David Lammy has said that there's a huge evacuation exercise ongoing. The first government flight out of the Middle East since the conflict began landed at Stansted Airport from Oman just before 1 a.m. this morning. Another is scheduled to leave tonight. Now, there's more than 140,000 Britons in the region have registered their presence with the Foreign Office. And just to put the threat into context, the UAE says that its air defences have intercepted 9 ballistic missiles and 109 drones today alone. Meanwhile, people in Qatar were awakened by an emergency alert on their phones overnight, after which the Ministry of Defence announced that it had intercepted a drone targeting an airbase, which happens to be the biggest US military base in the region. Well, let's now speak with Baroness Warsi, Sayeeda Warsi, former senior minister in David Cameron's government, former minister in the Home Office. Foreign Office, she now joins us from Doha in Qatar. Sayeeda, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ayesha. I think your connectivity or my connectivity is a little bit insecure. So just in case I stop hearing you, I'll let you know.
OK, and there'll probably be a slight delay on the line, so I'll let you speak. So look, tell us what you're doing in Qatar and what's happening where you are.
I think what you asked me is what you're doing in Qatar, but I think the connectivity is quite bad, Aisha. Well, we are out here. We came in a week ago today, literally hours before the war started, and hours before airspace was closed. And this is a pre-planned trip. We're visiting family who live out here. My grandchildren live out here, and we're staying with them at the moment.
And tell us what's happening there. What's the sort of situation like in terms of these strikes?
I think, Aisha, it's of course unnerving, because the sound of the thud and the sound of missiles coming in, even when they're being intercepted, occasionally it feels like something has landed. There's the place where we're staying will shake. You'll feel the windows rattling, and that is usually combined with various alerts on our phone about what we need to be doing, how we need to take cover. So, of course, that's unnerving. You are effectively in a war zone. But then the other side of it is quite surreal, where when that stops, people just seem to get on with living their lives. So at the moment, the grandchildren are off school, or schools are closed. It's online learning. Most people are not going into the office. People are working from home. And it just feels like a really nice family day where we're spending time with them. We're playing board games. We're watching, cartoons back to back. I think Ninjano is coming out my ears at the moment. And the kids just seem to be quite resilient. They've, initially they wanted to know what the sound was, and we told them it was bad weather and it was thunderstorms. And then, of course, they were saying, well, it's not raining. And I said, well, we think it might rain soon. So, we were trying to kind of distract them. But now I think that they've been on various online classes, and their school friends have been talking about that there's bad things happening. We've tried to explain to them in the best way we can for their age bracket as to what is happening. But they seem to kind of listen and then move on to the next thing. The next thing we're doing is making friendship bracelets. So we're trying to keep life as normal as we possibly can. It's also, as you know, the month of Ramadan. So it's a moment where most of the day is punctuated by prayers. And I think that's been a really good thing at this difficult time. And we're with our kids. And ultimately, my husband and I were saying if we were thousands of miles away, we'd have been far more worried than we are, because we're here with them and we feel like, it feels much more stable somehow being with them than it does being far away from them.
And the big question now, Sayeeda, is what comes next? And particularly from our point of view, from a domestic point of view, what is Britain's future involvement going to be? David Lammy has been out this morning saying that he thinks it would be possible for Britain to get involved and actually conduct airstrikes against Iran if those strikes were defensive. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important, Ayesha, to go back to basics, which is that this war was neither necessary, nor was it preemptive, nor is it legal, and nor should we be getting involved. This is not our war. The UN Charter on this is very clear. You can't go and invade another country because you want to implement regime change. You can't go in and invade another country because you don't like what it's doing to its own citizens. And if you are choosing to employ preemptive strikes, which is what Israel and the United States were trying to justify their actions as, then there is a very clear and specific requirement of when preemptive strikes can be justified, and there's a process that has to be gone through for those preemptive strikes to be legal. None of that has happened, and I think we must be really careful. We're now entering a world, and have entered a world, where effectively might is right, where those with the biggest guns can decide that they can go into any country and do whatever they want, and the concept of nation states and boundaries no longer applies. And these rules were put in place for a reason. International law, the UN Charter, the requirements of international accountability and agreement were put in place for a very specific reason after the First and Second World War. And when we start to dismantle them, in the end, we will suffer the consequences of that. And if there is one thing, listen, far be from me to be sat here praising a Labour Prime Minister, but I am so relieved that we have a Labour Prime Minister in charge at the moment, and that some of the nonsense and rhetoric we're hearing from other quarters is not what is running our country. Because it is neither legal nor right, nor in our interests for us to be doing anything but what we are doing at the moment, which is providing defensive support for our allies, which is completely the right thing to do, but also making it clear that this is not our war and this is not something that we should be engaging in.
I mean, I think these decisions are so difficult. There's never, I think, a really clear right thing to do. I mean, you look at what happened in Iraq, and that didn't go particularly well. But then you look at what happened in Syria, where Britain decided to not get involved, and you can argue that didn't go anywhere. So these decisions are very, very difficult, I think. I think anyone who...
But the law is clear, Ayesha. Look, I sat at the cabinet table, and I also sat at the National Security Council when these discussions were taking place, both in relation to Syria and also in relation to Libya. And we made very different decisions in relation to both. And I was part of the process and the conversations that led up to how those decisions were finally made, both at the National Security Council and at cabinet. But in the end, and maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, in the end, what should be guiding us on all of this is what is it that we are legally entitled to do. It is not about what on a day-to-day our mood takes a swing, or we decide that we think we want to do this, or that country we don't particularly like, or that regime is brutal, which the Iranian regime is. It's not about making a case-by-case decision on the mood of the person in charge, which is what seems to be happening in the United States. It is also not about being blindly following the agenda of countries like Israel, who have their own agenda of expansionism, for which they make no secret, by the way. Their leaders quite openly talk about their agenda of expansionism. So I just think that we've got to be really careful about being dragged into something which is not our war, cannot be justified, and is not legal.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting, you really praised Keir Starmer there, but what's come out, there's been a leak of this National Security Council meeting where it's come to light, was much more gung-ho about wanting to give America that support right from the get-go and allow them to use British bases. It's been leaked that he was restrained by Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves, Shabana Mahmood and Ed Miliband. What do you think about that? About clearly he wanted to be more involved, and also about the leak, because you've been in those very high level meetings.
Yeah. Anybody who leaks from the National Security Council, Ayesha, does not deserve to be in government. I take these issues incredibly seriously. We had a number of leaks from the National Security Council when I was in government. And, we made sure that those matters were looked into, and people in the end had to, there was some consequence for those people who had been involved in this. I think, unfortunately, we've now got to a point where we play fast and loose with national security. We play fast and loose with national interest. We've seen it with, some of my colleagues who have lost their jobs over this situation. With former defense secretaries, Priti Patel, actually, who lost her job because of what she was doing in Israel with unauthorized meetings. So I just think we've got to start to have a national conversation about what is in Britain's national interest, how we deal with the issues of national security, and how we take the offices that we hold seriously. Because I think somewhere along the way, we've lost what it means to be patriotic, and we've lost what it means to actually put our own country's interests and legality front and centre.
And what about the fact that Keir Starmer was clearly more gung-ho and he wanted to go ahead? Would you have supported that if he had done that?
I listen, this is a leak, and I am not going to comment on it. The whole point of having an open and frank conversation at National Security Council is so that as a country we make the best possible decisions, Ayesha. And when people leak those meetings, then they ensure that in future cases we don't make the best possible decisions, because people are looking over their shoulder thinking, am I going to be leaked? Am I going to be questioned on this? So there were moments, Ayesha, both in National Security Council and in Cabinet, where colleagues had differences of opinion. But in the end, when we came to a decision, we stood by that.
But to move on, so let's move away from the leak. If a decision is made by the current government to actively join in strikes against Iran, and Keir Starmer makes that decision, would you support him?
Well, he would first of all have to bring that matter to Parliament, and there would have to be a debate in both houses, and there would have to be a vote in the House of Commons. And I do not think that the country, and if you look at both the parliamentary view and if you look at all polling in the United Kingdom, that would be both against what parliamentarians believe, and it would be against what the British public believe. And therefore, I think not only would it not be a legal decision, because also we'd have to have legal advice published as to whether or not what we were about to do was legal. Not only is this not our war and we should not be involved in it, but also the British public do not want this. And I sincerely hope that we don't start to slip into mission creep, and we do not commit our young men and women to be dying and losing their lives and risking their lives because of somebody else's political agenda and an illegal war. And actually, you and I have spoken so many times. I have a long history as a family. We have a long association with the British Armed Forces, including family who serve today.
Okay.
And when members of my family joined and have joined successively over generations to defend and protect Britain, they did it to defend and protect Britain. They did not do it to become embroiled in Israel's expansionist agenda or to become cannon fodder for an illegal war by the United States.
I just a couple of messages, a couple of questions have come in from our listeners, so I'm just going to put them to you quickly. Someone says, does your guest not understand that Iran has been sponsoring terrorism in the region for years and is on the point of getting nuclear weapons? And someone else says NATO's action in Kosovo was not sanctioned by the UN, but that was something that actually we were proud to have done. What would you say to those two questions?
I think two completely different scenarios. First of all, as far as the Iran issue is concerned, the negotiations were being led by the Omanis. Saeed Badr, who's the Omani foreign minister, who I've actually worked with in the past, is an incredibly seasoned, thoughtful diplomat. And when he has to come out and start making very public statements about how agreement had been reached, that actually the next day agreement was probably likely to be signed, that all access would be given within 90 90 days, that it was unlikely that Iran would ever have access to enriched uranium, that enriched uranium that they had would actually be downgraded, that where all of this was being put in place, as I said a couple of days ago, Ayesha, the reason why Israel decided this was the moment to strike was not because an Iran nuclear deal had failed to materialize. It was because it had materialized, that actually there had been a breakthrough, not a breakdown. And therefore, Israel realized that this was its last moment to be able to do what it has wanted to do for nearly 2 decades. And as, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs said, this was the first president that was stupid enough to have agreed to it.
OK, well, look, Sayeeda, we'll have to leave it there, but I hope you and your family stay safe and that you are able to get home when the time comes. Thanks very much for your time.